Hello. Hello, everyone. Dr. Judy here of Dr. Judy WTF, and thank you for tuning in. And this is a call-in show, everybody. So please feel free to call in 323-843-2826. And tonight's topic is self-reflecting and correcting our own narcissistic tendencies. And we have in studio my life coach, Yitz, Epstein.
How are you?
I have to say, I enjoy the company of bouncing ideas off of Yitz in studio. So it's nice to have you back. Thank you.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
I know the people really appreciate you, particularly because you seem to have a really great sense of working with the mind map and understand narcissistic injuries. And today we're going to talk about narcissistic tendencies. So just because we have narcissistic tendencies doesn't make us a narcissistic personality disorder cluster B diagnosed person. And I want to start by introducing the mind map to everybody, because we're going to shrink and we're going to deconstruct narcissism. We're going to talk about healthy narcissism, and we're going to talk about narcissistic behaviors. So the irony is that if you're tuning into the show and you are interested in self-reflecting on your own narcissistic tendencies, especially if you're interested in self-correcting on your own narcissistic tendencies, chances are that you don't have NPD. Why? Because people who are truly steeped in this personality disorder, in this system gone wrong, have no interest in self-correcting and no interest in self-reflecting. What they are interested in is blaming, finger pointing, shaming other people, because that's their mechanism to help to take their own poison out from their wounds of childhood. So let me introduce the mind map. So for those of you who are listening for the first time, the mind map is a pathway to healing. It's a way of identifying childhood wounds, how we react to childhood wounds, and how they encode into the fiber of our being. And once they encode in there, that panel 3, the third panel to the right, is the trigger happy panel, because when people set us off, we then will fall into chaos, defenses, and breakdowns. And this is what I refer to as the WTF, because we repeat and repeat this dynamic, and until we go back into our childhood wounds, clean them out, deconstruct the past, only then can we reconstruct into paradigm shift, healing, and a sense of unity. So with that said, I want to read a little bit of something about something that I did want to read to you, and it is here. We must remember that we all have a narcissistic side in us. It is important to have it so that we can develop a healthy self-esteem. However, when this goes sideways, it does no longer reflect a healthy self-esteem. It now crosses the line into hurting other people. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So, yes, first of all, I want to share with the audience that you are leading a narcissistic abuse recovery group. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Do.
People can tune in and actually come to the office.
Yeah, well,
yes.
I've been getting a lot of messages about people who are not local for our meetup in Sherman Oaks. So this is available for anyone who would like to tune in. It'll be taking place on Sundays, and the link, I believe, should be in the description. Feel free to sign up. And the meetup group is really going to be a place where you can feel validated.
This is a personal meetup group.
Correct. Well,
not a webinar.
Well, the webinar I'm talking about specifically, but the personal meetup group, obviously we have Sunday nights in Sherman Oaks, and then the webinar is going to be, you log in and I'll be answering questions. You'll be able to ask, we'll essentially a place to feel accepted and validated, no matter where you are. I know that during my own specific journey from really healing from my own injuries.
Just on the details of that, Sunday night from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in Sherman Oaks, and call for details. And that's the live in-person support group.
Correct.
And it's $10 per person, very affordable for everyone. And then you have a webinar that is
Correct.
beginning when?
So I believe February 3rd.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm very
Yeah,
excited.
okay.
And anyone across the globe can sign up. There is the link in the description.
Do you have a time
to
yet?
do that? Around 3 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 p.m. About an hour and a half long. And yeah, I mean, I know, like I was mentioning before, during on my own journey, obviously trying to heal my own wounds, I always just wanted to be around people who can kind of give me some feedback, because it is a very lonely journey, and having this group is going to allow you to feel accepted, ask questions about where you're holding, and I'll help you navigate that experience.
So the reason I decided to do this particular episode is because we talk about the narcissist, but sometimes we also have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, do we have narcissistic tendencies? And how do they show up? And how do they impact other people? And what can we do about it so that we don't end up pushing people away, using people, and becoming borderline unethical with, well, I call it vampiring other people's energies and then tossing them aside as if they were objects. So I want to talk a little bit about healthy narcissism and stage of development. Healthy narcissism is based on healthy parenting, healthy dependency. Back to Dr. John Bowlby, who is the father of attachment theory. When a baby has proper emotional nutrients, eye contact, skin contact, stay-at-home mothering, parents that are in harmony with each other, more or less, and again, nothing's perfect. When we have those emotional ingredients of stability in the family, then what we develop is a sense of secure attachment. When we don't develop secure attachment, then we are on a pathway to a system gone wrong, and our internal mechanism gets imbalanced, and it's hard for us to self-regulate. It's hard for us to keep a sense of self, a constant sense of self, and then we develop a false sense of self, which we're going to get into tonight. And so, again, I want to remind you that if you're tuning in and you are interested in self-reflecting and self-correcting, then this is very responsible, and this is the way, this is the pathway to healing, because that's what we have to do, is we have to own our own stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about narcissistic behaviors, because people sometimes they don't understand what are narcissistic behaviors. Well, I would say some obvious ones are being mean to the waiter. Okay, that's pretty narcissistic. Walking in front of somebody and slamming the door in their face, that's pretty narcissistic behavior. Can you think of some others, Yitz?
Well, anything that doesn't see other people is highly narcissistic, and
Yes.
that when we're talking about self-correcting and self-reflecting, when we
Right.
don't see ourselves as one person and there's other people too, and we have to be careful because our actions might influence them in a negative or positive way. We have to identify what we're doing to impact them. When we're not doing that, we're going to impact other people and not realize it, and be very careless. So, I mean, specific examples, really just, spilling your drink and not saying sorry, just really just like other people's feelings don't matter. That's really, I see a lot of that.
Another thing that I noticed are very shallow answers. So let's say that you're talking to me and I give you a one-word response. No effort into the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed that, and it's kind of like shooting from the hip, kind of just like here's an answer. I don't have the time to actually face you and give you the attention you deserve. So, a lot of one-word answers, quick statements that sound witty, and technically they answer the question, but they also kind of are telling you that I'm really just not interested in engaging.
Yeah. So if you feel that the person is blowing you off, then they probably are, because they're not really interested in taking you in. So one of the ways of seeing this is that when we're in a healthy relationship, you want to ingest the person, take them in. You want to digest what they're saying, which is a process. You've got to think and feel and empathize with, and then you want to manifest something to them. So it's like, if you're telling me something, then I would be honored that you're entrusting me with your emotional feedback or
Sure.
your emotions. And if I just flip off your emotions, then it's going to feel that way. It's going to feel very isolative. It's going to
Yeah.
feel very hurtful and insulting. If I take in what you're saying, consider it, and then feed it back to you, we now have panel 7, interconnection.
Sure. I mean, that's
Right?
that's human connection. You know, you feel like if you're connecting with somebody, I believe you truly feel that connection. Empathy, that's the idea behind empathy, is that when you talk to me, I feel that I give you the respect you deserve. I take into consideration your feelings and your thoughts that you're investing in this conversation. You don't have to talk to me. You can talk to anyone, and you're choosing to talk to me. You know, the narcissistically injured person or a narcissistic tendency would be the entitlement, where, of course, you're talking to me because I'm the greatest person that ever lived. So it's a
Right.
you know, so there's a certain amount of respect, a certain amount of human empathy and respect that's necessary. And you know, no one wants to be told that they're narcissistic. You know, it's a classic sign that you see oftentimes. The narcissist will so readily tell the victim or other people that what their problems are. Rarely are they ever willing to say, okay, maybe I have that very same issue. In which case, I'm sorry that you're struggling with that. I'm struggling with that too. It's more like, no, I don't have that kind of problem. That's way below me. It's you that has the issue that needs to correct it.
And there isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't get a call, an email, a conversation in the session where they say, oh, my husband is a narcissist, my wife is a narcissist, my boyfriend is a narcissist, my mother is a narcissist. And I think we have a call-in. So hi, you are on the couch. And what is your name, please?
Hi, my name is Diana from Montreal.
Diana?
Diana.
Diana. Hi, Diana from Montreal. How you doing?
Hi, Dr. Judy.
Hi.
Good. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, I'm from Montreal, too.
I know. That's so exciting.
It's so cool to, I'll have to say A. If I don't hear you, I'll just say, Diana, A. That's what Montreal people do.
Right?
Right,
It's freezing
exactly.
over here. Kind of a lot of freezing rain, and it's slippery outside, and it's a nightmare.
I know. I lived it. And so come visit Southern California, and
Can't wait.
Yeah, that would be lovely. So tell me a little bit about what prompted the phone call and what's been on your mind.
Well, basically, I have a narcissistic mother.
Okay.
And I recently, came into enlightenment with all of this, and I came across your videos, and it helped me understand so many things about my childhood.
Okay.
And I realized, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, do you have the free PDF of the book? Do you have that copy?
I do. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but I'm really excited to.
Okay. So, all right. So you began telling me that you have a narcissistic mother. You're beginning to discover more about the impact on you, and yeah.
And yeah. So now, basically, I'm a mother myself. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old, and it's always been my mother and me my whole life. I'm 30 years old. It's always been just she and I until recently, and I basically have to rewire everything I was ever taught, and it's kind of coming back to me. All the negative impact that she's had on me. I'm projecting onto my children. I tend to disconnect from them from time to time, and I just can't see how I can get so disconnected sometimes. I'm a very loving person. I love my children and my husband deeply. It's just in the autism, the robot world that we're always working. We're coming back home, we disconnect, and then myself, I become my mother in certain ways, and I'm just scared to see, you know, the look of my child's face when I scream at him. Or,
You
you know,
know,
it's basically, I know exactly how he feels.
the fact that you're trying so hard to recognize your own qualities that you're projecting onto your children is tremendous.
It's very scary.
It's scary, and it's fantastic that you're doing that. Do you think that your mother did that?
My mother was like that my whole life. She always, you know, I was always the, you know, I saw that you said it's always the same sentences, you know, you stupid idiot, you know.
Yeah.
And I was treated like this my whole childhood and teenage years, and now it's, you know, I met my husband, and he taught me everything all over again, you know, values and the foundation of a person, and
Yes.
everything I have to relearn as a person because I didn't get that knowledge, you know, growing up. And basically that's when I found, you know, that's when I realized everything, you know, how I speak to some people, how I explode, you know, the anger that I have built up is just not normal.
So one thing that we all have to do is to step back from ourselves and perceive ourselves. Once we have that ability to perceive ourselves like we're watching a movie, then we have objectivity. And once we have that objectivity, we could then pull back and say, wow, I didn't like what I just said. I don't like what I just did to my child. Yeah. And that's step number one, is this level of self-awareness. You were going to say something?
Yeah,
else?
I mean, you know, one of the big issues with self-reflecting is that there's a kind of like a damage to the ego, to the self, right? And then the superego kind of takes over. So self-reflection is essentially saying that the superego can now, you know, really terrorize you, and especially when we grow up with
which is the judgment.
Correct. That's the one that balances, kind of makes sure everything's correct and moral. So, you know, we want that. We want to be, but when we already have a narcissistic mother that has kind of, or parent that created a certain sense of judgment on us, then that superego takes on that voice, and we want to get a healthy self-reflection, not a self-reflection that beats us over the head.
So one of the things that I talk much about is that consciousness is causal. Okay, so if you're in the consciousness of self-correction rather than in the consciousness of self-blame and shame and criticism, do you see the difference?
Yes, of course. It's just, it's very scary, and it's hard to come across that because it's kind of, you fall into the routine and you become, like I become this again, and then I catch myself 2-3 weeks later, and I say, hey, what have I wake up suddenly and I say, what have I been doing for the past 2 weeks? I haven't been paying attention to my husband's needs, to my children, you know, I disconnected from them again. And that's when I say, why am I doing this? Why am I constantly sabotaging myself?
Okay, so let's get into the why. All right, so panel 1, childhood injuries. There are 5 of them. There's obviously physical abuse, obviously there's verbal emotional abuse, obviously there's sexual abuse, not so obviously neglect, and then there is smothering or spoiling. What can you identify with in terms of your childhood wounds?
Absolutely all of them.
All of them? Wow.
All of them, yeah.
Okay. Which means
it's something that I'm sorry?
I'm just thinking that if you experienced all of them, you're probably suffering from emotional dysregulation, complex PTSD, which is an extreme form of reactivity to life, kind of like a like war veterans experience PTSD when they come back from the war. So when these emotions are not resolved, then they tend to visit the present. So this is a 2-part kind of thing. Step number 1 is identify those childhood wounds, how you reacted to them, and then how you encoded them, and then basically now how you're projecting them. Because when we're not comfortable, what we want to do is we want to regulate our emotions. And with the narcissistic and also the dysregulated emotional core, we want to project these feelings, kind of like we want to vomit them out on other people. So we don't like them. So what do? we give them to somebody else. Hey,
Yep.
Yitz, here, take them. I don't want my feelings.
Yeah.
You take them. You feel bad. Okay?
Especially if I'm your child, if I'm in love with your partner, then I'm going to almost want to make you happy. So if that's what I need to do to make you happy, then, and that's where you see the self-sabotaging behavior of being a partner or a child is really, it's like, okay, what do I need to do to please mom? Self-destruct. Well, then so be it. And it's very troubling to watch.
Right, and then your husband and you are co-creating this really unhealthy dynamic because he loves you, he wants to be with you, and so if you're pulling back from him, then he may fall into the dynamic of chasing you and reinforcing the behavior. So this has to be approached on many levels. Level 1, deconstructing the childhood wounds, which is what the mind map does, and then reconstructing into health by literally exhuming the poison and reprocessing the poison so that it doesn't live in you and that it doesn't get played out into what I keep calling the WTF, the what the Freud, and doesn't play out on your children. So as you know, this is a multi-generational kind of thing because since your mother didn't heal herself, where was your father in the picture, by the way?
He was never in the picture. I met him when I was 14, and we never really spoke that much.
Okay, well, how fortunate that you married somebody who is caring and empathic and can show you new ethics and new ways of being in a relationship. And so just remember that the internal world is so dysregulated that we'll do anything to get that poison out, including hurting other people. So why do I call this particular show self-reflecting and self-correcting? That's what you're doing. You're saying, oops, I did it again. Wow. Yeah. And then the part that is very significant is that you do have empathy because you can feel the ouch that you're creating in your children. You can feel the ouch. So what you want to do is you want to move it a little bit closer to, in other words, you want to move the needle to the prevention. So before you create the ouch, you want to know that the words that are coming out of your mouth are not so pleasant and not so healing. Exactly. So it's a preventative thing. I have up on the website for everyone, it's free, I have a mind map journey. You can find it under the forms section, Dr. Judy WTF or psychologicalhealingcenter.com. And if you go to the forms section, then you can pull up the mind map journal, and in there is a wound activation prevention plan. Okay, it's a wound activation prevention system, actually. It's also in the book. And for those of you who do not have a copy of the book, just download it or ask us if you don't know how to do it, and we will get you a copy, because truly we want everybody to understand how these childhood wounds impact you. So going back to self-reflection and self-correction, you're a very lucky individual because somewhere, somehow you had enough empathy to start this process with yourself. And people who are very, very narcissistically defended, they dare not exhibit any signs of empathy because that would mean that their shell would have to soften, and that would not be too protective for them. And so they would not want to engage in this sort of a self-reflective kind of thinking. So I want to commend you for that, and I really appreciate you calling in. And please feel free to reach out to myself, the team, and soon partake in the webinar.
Yes, I absolutely will.
Please
yes,
on February 3rd.
Yes, and for those of you, and thank you. So be in touch from my fellow Canadian listener, and keep warm.
Thank you, Dr. Judy.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
And Mr. Yitz, or Dr. Yitz.
Yes, thank you so much for calling.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
pleasure.
au revoir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so I also wanted to say that this is the last week that we are offering the Mind Map video series at a discount. Normally it's $595, and it's been at a discount of $195. Very well worth the money because it's about 8 or 10 hours of me simply breaking down the entire mind map with a case study included so that you could really, really delve in and use the mind map journal to journey through this. And then if you wish, you can use one of the therapists, life coaches on staff to help you through your journey at any point. So look for other discounts that we will be having. And I also want to announce for the people who are graduates of the mind map, graduates that have completed the 10 sessions with me or anyone else on the team, I am going to be starting a once-a-month Mind Map Graduates group in Sherman Oaks, and I will be sending out notification. But if you're listening and you're one of the patients of the Psychological Healing Center and you'd like to participate, it's going to be the third Tuesday of every month, starting on February, I think
12th, was it?
19th.
19th, okay.
February 19th, okay? So I will be sending out notification. So I think that you're all beginning to connect the dots. If you've been listening to countless episodes, then you can start connecting the dots and seeing that there's a cause behind everything, and that when we're not well, when we're in unhealed emotional states, then we're not going to act very nice necessarily to other people, or we will act too nice to people and become the people pleaser and the codependent, which is also not very nice because let's follow that, chain of thought. That's another form of narcissism. I'll be really, really nice to you, okay, Yitz? But secretly I want something from you.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, that's the narcissist and the codependent dance. You know, there's a exchange going on. The exchange is that the narcissist is essentially creating a form of protection, kind of like a strong boundary.
Yes.
And the codependent is saying, I need that protection. I'll be whatever you want me to be. So there is a certain amount of both really needing each other to complement the dysfunction. And that might be tough to hear just because codependent is the one being abused, so to speak, which is the truth. I mean, the narcissist is the perpetrator, but we want to identify that on the healing journey. We need to self-correct and self-reflect and correct, because we need to know, okay, am I maybe playing, what's my role in this dysfunction? And when we identify that we do have some role in it, even if it's maybe secondary gain, then we want to identify that so we can take ourselves out of it.
And that's the thing, is that these deals are very, they're not overt deals.
No.
So the people pleaser might be thinking, if I invest in you long enough, eventually you'll be nice to me.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that plays into the whole, if I can be good enough, if only I can just earn, your love, which is, just kind of the WTF of in childhood, when we're not being reflected properly, we're not being mirrored properly and attuned to, then we desperately want that connection to mom and dad, which is perfectly normal.
And
Every
we'll
child
pay
does.
any price.
Exactly, even
Right.
self-sabotaging and giving up my sense of well-being.
So what is healthy narcissism? I want to refer to Dr. Murray Bowen, who talks about separation and individuation and healthy dependency. So when we're healthily dependent on our mothers and our fathers, we get to hatch. We get to hatch out of the dynamics of dependency to eventually a sense of self and independence, and then develop the way of being interdependent with each other. When we don't have this healthy dependency, then we may go in another direction. For example, we may associate relationships with being smothered. We may associate relationships with being engulfed. And this is the childhood wound specifically that I'm referring to as smothering and controlling. So if your parents were smothering and controlling, you might think to yourself, ugh, this is icky, this is sticky, I don't want to get involved. If somebody shows me signs of intimacy, watch out and run. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy, honestly, because we every human being, we're wired to connect, and everyone wants to be close and connected. The issue is that these attachment traumas create such a disconnect that you really are kind of up against it, because we want to connect, so therefore we run towards people. We feel smothered, we run away. We feel abandoned, we run towards them, and it becomes so painful to get any of our true needs met, because we're this is not a fun experience, being a feeling of it, but yet we invest ourselves in relationships, and we work, we're willing to work extremely hard to get that, but it's just very, very painful.
So if we're not separated and individuated, then our shell might become too hard, as in the narcissistic defense, or too soft, as in the borderline defense. And so we're not able to really create synergy, interconnection, and have a mature, healthy, growing, loving partnership.
Yeah, correct. And one of the things we do, we in the relationship is, we partners tend to, children even tend to trigger our wounds, and which is very easy to do. One of the narcissistic tendencies is projection. So, Freud's projection process, where there's such an intense feeling like the person who did trigger you is the actual cause. And if we do believe that, we will perpetrate the very same wounds that were inflicted on us on them, and obviously push people away, because no one wants to be around people, someone who's continuously projecting their wounds. And that's also why it's so important to self-reflect and correct, which is a huge portion of the healing, is that we look at ourselves and we say, listen, maybe the wounds weren't your fault, but you were they are there,
happy
and
recipient or unhappy recipient, I should say. Yes.
Yeah, we need to heal those wounds. We need to correct our thinking and our relationship patterns in order to have proper, healthy interconnection.
So let's go more behavioral on what does it look like, what does it sound like. Well, I've lived a pretty long life, so I know what it looks like and sounds like, and I've had experiences where I felt an extreme disconnect. It might even be being on a cell phone for so long and choosing the computer or the cell over another human being. These are signs of human disconnect. So other signs of human disconnect might be even little things, chronically leaving dishes in the sink and expecting somebody else to clean up after you, chronically being late and abusing somebody's time, taking advantage of somebody's time, going to a restaurant with a friend and always sticking them with the bill, or conveniently leaving early so they have to pay the bill. So I think you're getting the drift of what this looks like and sounds like, and I want you to really understand behaviorally so that it's not just a theoretical thing. It manifests. It manifests in everyday life. And this is a call-in show, everybody, so please call in 323-843-2826 and get on the couch and feel free to ask about healthy narcissism and unhealthy narcissism, and why everyone's so busy pointing the finger at others and not taking at least a moment to ask themselves, like Diane did, wait a minute, am I doing this to my children? And if I am, then stop and look at the blueprint and look at what this particular dynamics is doing for you. Probably giving you some sense of a relief for a second, but then that relief doesn't really come, and then the guilt and the shame sets in if you have a little bit of empathy. And if you don't have empathy, then the guilt and the shame doesn't set in, and you just keep doing it over and over, and it's almost like your feelings are cauterized. You don't feel anymore.
It's a tragedy, honestly, and it's hard to blame someone like that. And obviously, everyone's responsible for their actions, and that's why we need to self-reflect and correct. But that being said, self-reflecting could mean that if I look at my own self, I realize that was narcissistically abused myself, or I was perpetrated by myself, by my own parent. I mean, no, that's a very, very difficult thing to face. And
Very.
but ultimately, if you want to heal, if we want to get to a place where we can take responsibility for our actions, we need to own our wounds, even though we didn't cause them.
And own our actions and own our
Correct.
projections on other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to Dr. Murray Bowen, separation and individuation, how does that happen? So it starts with healthy dependency. And then as the baby feels safe and secure, they go through stages of development. And then after a while, they start checking back to the parent, and the parent would be there in the background watching the child at play or engaged in whatever activity. And then as the child felt more and more confident, the child can move away slowly, separate and individuate. But if the child doesn't have secure attachment and looks back at the mother and the father and they're emotionally or physically gone, they may freak out and they may get very anxious. And then their cognitions are messed up and they lose the ability to develop and play and be curious in the world because they have to reestablish their sense of safety.
Correct.
So they don't have the chance to go through this proper separation and individuation process.
Yeah, it's a developmental trauma. It's a narcissistic injury, a wound to the self. So I think, again, Alice Miller, we talked about last week as well. She talks about how there's different degrees of wounds, and there's some wounds that are so shattering to the sense of self that the self is annihilated. That's very troubling to think about, but some parents, they have that power over their children. I mean, every parent has that kind of power. Some people take advantage of that. So a wound could be, like you mentioned, not being there emotionally. That can create an abandonment wound, even though the parent is still there. So it's a difficult job, obviously, being a parent and being there for the child. So every parent injures their child to a certain degree, but it's unless we have to heal that self, that sense of well-being, because the self is really the tool. It's who we are and how we interact with the world.
And I also get a lot of comments from parents, wow, I think I messed up my children. What do I do now? So what do you do now is you heal thyself. And what you do in terms of your children is you own your own stuff so that you let your children know if you're behaving inappropriately, you let them know, look, I think mom was a little too harsh, or I want to correct on that, so that they learn the skills of self-reflecting and self-correcting. Because it's not necessarily about being perfect. It's about really learning how to get back on track when you have disconnected. We're all going to disconnect. How do you get back on track after the disconnect? So that's really, really important, is with your children, learning and teaching them how to go back to connection with you and reaching your hand toward them so that they can come back. Okay, so now I want to talk about narcissism, very unhealthy narcissism, where they literally sever the bond. Okay, so there's certain behaviors that are going to absolutely sever the bond, and people need to be aware that if there's any sort of threat or domestic violence or anything that makes another person fear for themselves, their physical or mental well-being, then at that particular point, you may want to wish the person well.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay,
if you can.
and really wish the person well, okay? Because even though there may be a tendency to want to help that person, sometimes you're not that person's healer anymore, and you have to let them go.
Yeah, I mean, one of letting someone go could be the very thing they need to reach that point, because when you're trying to cater to them and help them and heal, sometimes a person doesn't really feel the full weight of the injury and what's going on, and that we call that in AA they call that reaching rock bottom, and sometimes that's necessary because it's pain can be the greatest motivator. And when we ultimately, when you're all alone and there's no one else to hold responsible because you've dug yourself your own grave, that's when sometimes that's what it takes sometimes to realize, well, guess what? I'm the one who's causing everything, and I have to correct it.
And healthy narcissism is when you can put your boundaries up and say, look, I'm sorry you're behaving that way. I'm just not going to be in your circle.
Yep.
And I'm not going to be
And
taking that.
Yeah,
So
and
that's the boundary. There's panel 5 where healthy boundaries are to do much with healthy narcissism, because if we don't protect the self, then we can't be there for another person. If we're not safe within ourself, then we can't interconnect. If trust is broken, for example, then there's no way to create synergy and panel 7. And that is healthy narcissism. Sometimes you do have to say goodbye to people to preserve that healthy sense of self.
Yeah, and that's difficult also if you have an abandonment fear, or you've been abandoned or even narcissistically abused. You tend to hold on. You tend to feel like you don't want that, obviously, so you hold on to maybe dysfunctional bonds, toxic relationships. So it's ultimately, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to take responsibility for our wounds, and if somebody else's toxicity is bringing you down, then it's just take responsibility for ourselves and let them go.
Yes, and I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more call-ins. This is a college show, so please feel free to get on the couch. 323-843-2826. And Yitz, I want to ask you a little bit about your work with the narcissistic recovery group. Do you find that the people who come to group are more willing to self-reflect and self-correct?
I do, and first of all, I'm greatly benefiting from the group myself, and I make sure everyone understands that I'm also on my my healing journey, my growth journey in life.
We all are.
We all are,
Yes.
and it's important to obviously keep growing, keep getting becoming healthier.
Yes.
People, and the way I start is I make sure I let everyone know that it's okay to be vulnerable by opening up about my own experiences, and by doing that, it invites everyone to do that, because even if you're not a narcissist per se, but you do have the defenses and you are maybe terrified of being vulnerable.
Sure.
It's very comforting to hear someone else open up about their own stories, because ultimately there's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of self really disgust at times, because you feel like you're not good enough, or whatever it is. So by realizing that by opening up about those vulnerabilities and being okay with it, that's unbelievably healing and very beneficial.
And I've always admired that quality in people, when somebody can say, what I just said was totally coming from a place of anger, or totally coming from a place of jealousy. I really, really admire that person. And if you can be that person, then you can take inventory of these behaviors. And when it's amazing, because when you start owning your own stuff, people around you will start owning their own stuff. I have a cute little story about my grandson. He was really, really funny. A few weeks ago, he went into the refrigerator and he took the blueberries and spilled them all over my kitchen floor. And I had a reaction, because I didn't feel like cleaning up. It was my weekend and I was tired. It's like, I don't want to clean all this stuff up. I got a little angry at him, and then he started getting angry at me. And then I said, I think I went a little too far. It's just blueberries, okay? We could clean them up. And he looks at me and he says, Grandma, I think we're starting to get along now.
That's wonderful.
And it was so beautiful to watch that the minute I started owning my own stuff, he started owning his stuff too, and saying, well, next time I'll ask for your help, or next time. And it's just, that's panel 7, right? Is when you can work as a team, and when you could be honest about your own mess ups, and the other person can take that in, and instead of hitting you over the head with it, which is what usually dysfunctional parents do. That's why people can't really share their feelings with their dysfunctional parents, because those feelings may and probably will be used against you.
Sure.
In a healthier relationship, there's space to say, you hurt my feelings. I did? I hurt your feelings? What did I say? What did I do?
Yeah.
What can I do differently?
It takes a lot of maturity, and growing up, there's a reason these shells, narcissistic defenses, these shells are created. The child is reaching out to mom and getting slapped for just having basic human or dad, parent, for having these basic needs, and they're getting slapped. So it becomes very difficult in an adult relationship to communicate that, because they've already confirmed in their mind that this is how people react when they do become vulnerable. So
That's right.
Yeah, it's a devastating shell, no question.
So if you think about it in terms of implosions or explosions, what happens when feelings are not healthfully expressed, when boundaries are not healthfully put up? People will either implode with anxiety and depression, or they'll explode into anger/violence, and neither of them are helpful. So the pathway to healing is to take inventory on the feelings, source them, and own them so that you don't project them. So what's a projection? Projection is to do with a cracked lens of perception. So when there's a big load of emotion toward another person, and that load of emotion is very charged because it comes from triggers from the past, then that person will be projected on. And they won't only be held responsible for what's happening in the here and now, they will be held responsible for everything that happened. Everything. And that's why it's so important to dismantle these injuries and these negative core beliefs, because then we become trigger happy in our negative core beliefs, and anyone and anything can set us off, and that's not how we want to go through life.
You become definitely difficult to be around. Yes. And it's ultimately, expressing ourselves is what makes us joyous and happy. We want to let other people know, oh, this is how I feel, either because of the relationship pattern that was developed where we are constantly telling ourselves that our feelings are not even valid, or our feelings are so valid. So we always
over and under.
It's never, and ultimately it takes maturity, it takes a lot of healing to say, this is how I feel, and not feel bad about it, or not wait for a response from the other person to validate that. So
I think we have, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
We have a call in, and I know we're running out of time. So one quick call in. Hi, what is your name, please?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
This is Katie.
Hi, Katie. How you doing?
I'm good. I've watched your show before. I'm catching it at the very end, but...
Okay. So tell me a little, where are you? What part of the country are you in?
In Long Beach, California.
Oh, great. So you're kind of local. Okay, excellent. So tell me what's on your mind. How do you identify with the topic of today, the topic of self-reflecting and self-correcting on our own narcissistic tendencies?
Well, sorry. I'm trying to keep it down. I didn't know I was going to actually get called in, pick up, but just like, one second.
Okay, no problem. You have a little private moment there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So how do you personally identify with your own? We all have narcissistic tendencies. So when you look in the mirror and you look at yours, what are you seeing?
Well, just knowing what I believe in, my intuitions, and sticking with them. Sometimes I would think that they might be like, for selfish reasons, but I know that in my intuition, they're not just selfish reasons; they're for good reasons. And I have to just be more confident with that, dealing with just narcissism, people, and just the whole idea of being selfish or giving and taking. And so, I'm a giving person, and I like to give, and then sometimes I get upset.
So question to you. So when you're giving, one of the arts to giving is to give to people who will be good receivers of your giving and will be able to give back. So looking at it from that point of view, how you doing with that?
Not so well.
Not so well. Okay, so you're probably more on the codependent scale of things. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you have to watch out for, therefore, is that when it's kind of like investing in a person, and you're investing in the wrong person. After a while, you're going to expect something in return, like Yitz and I were talking about. And if you don't get back what you thought you were going to get back, guess who's going to get really angry?
Yeah, me. And it's like there's no written contract on exactly what you'll get back, but it's just like, ethically, morally, you would think that, when time has gone by, like when someone can give back, you would think they would when they can. But then when time comes to it, they're still just not stepping up to it when I think they should.
Okay, so here's what I want to suggest to you. Okay, so rather than drawing on a deficit here and then getting angry that your efforts are not being returned, what I want you to do is invest slightly and see if your efforts are returned. And if they're not returned, then draw back the investment and see if they're invested in you. One of my favorite phrases is invest in those that invest in us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so just be really, really careful, because at the end of the day, you're going to feel tired, you're going to have a headache, you're going to feel vampired by giving, and then you may blow. So you may turn into one of those, at the end of that rainbow, you'll turn into an explosion. And that nice, giving, empathic, people-pleasing person that you thought you were may turn up angry and very resentful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And broken down
and sick. Exactly. Okay. So that is what I'm thinking you would want to watch out for. So in terms of the mind map, it would be panel number 5. You don't want to keep running at a deficit. You don't want to create that hole in the soul and give, and then enter into a panel 7 relationship with someone who's going to suck you dry, because it will not yield any light. Okay? So hold your light and share your light with those people that will share their light with you.
It makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And if you don't, do you have a copy of the book, Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect? Do you have that PDF?
I do not, but I know where to get it.
Yeah, you can download it, and all of you can download it, and it's free. So all of you can have that copy. And so please feel free to call the Psychological Healing Center if you need any more assistance with this. Again, I'm repeating a little bit, but I want everybody to hear. Healthy narcissism is a balance. Healthy narcissism is born out of healthy dependency, and how to play a better game of life is to not have a hard shell, not have a soft shell. Be like the 3 little bears and the 3 chairs. You want the chair that fits just right with you. And don't overinvest in people who don't invest in you. And then on the other hand, look to other people for feedback, because if you're being rude or abusive or demeaning and devaluing and destroying, and other people are complaining about that, then take that as your opportunity to start self-reflecting and self-correcting. So anything else, Yitz, that you want to say? We're going to shrink the tune in a minute, but thank you so much for calling in, and be in touch anytime, okay?
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. And thank you. Good night.
Good night.
And anything else you want to add, Yitz? We have like just a handful of minutes here.
Sure. I mean, I just want to identify that this journey is not an easy journey.
No.
It is not. It takes so much work and courage, but it is doable. It's possible to heal yourself and not. It's important not to demean, devalue, and destroy yourself on this journey, or others, of course.
Right.
But even when you are self-reflecting and self-correcting. There's, we're human beings. We make mistakes. We are injured, and just be good to yourself and be kind to yourself, because ultimately, we're healing ourselves. We're like nurturing ourselves. So we need to be very compassionate with ourselves, because these wounds, I mean, we can't beat them into healing. We got to really soothe ourselves and heal ourselves.
Just
as
like what we
compassionate as
talked
could.
about, I talked about the first episode of the year, having a healthier relationship with ourselves, is that we cannot, as you say, demean, devalue, destroy ourselves, because our primary relationship, most important relationship, is with ourselves.
Yeah, and when we're injured and we want to heal, we tend to look for other people to heal us, and we tend to do away with our own needs in order to get nutrients or validation or love from other people. But ultimately, we are the ones who need to take responsibility for our own actions and tendencies. And just because you have a narcissistic tendency, that doesn't make you a narcissist.
Right.
I know the term narcissist has such a negative connotation, and understandably so, because the behavior. But ultimately, somebody who's narcissistically injured is in a lot of pain. They're trying to even figure out what's wrong with them. There's really no context. There's no, and which is why the mind map is so effective, because it gives you that context to put your traumas.
And going right to the cause. Yeah. And we just have a couple of minutes, so we're going to quickly shrink the tune that describes narcissism, I think, very well. Carly Simon, You're So Vain. So I'll read a little. We may not get through the whole thing, but you can hear the gist of the vanity in the song. The narcissism. You walked into the party like you were walking on a yacht. Your hat strategically dipped below one eye. Your scarf, it was apricot. You had one eye in the mirror and watched yourself go by, and all the girls dreamed that they'd be your partner. You're so vain. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of panel one, it seems like this person thought that they were the most important being on the planet, so maybe they were over-idealized by their parent. I bet you think this song is about you, don't you? Oh, you had me several years ago when I was still naive. So somebody is learning about narcissism and trying to bust their act. When you said that we'd make such a pretty pair, but you gave away the things you loved, and one of them was me. So here's the reference to objectifying the person and the throwaway, right?
Sure.
The discard. I had some dreams. There were clouds in my coffee. So the shadows. This person obviously left this person very injured. And so the reference to the eclipse of the sun, well, you're where you should be all the time, and when you're not, you're with some underworld spy or the wife of a close friend. So reference to cheating. So what is narcissistic behavior is doing whatever you want, whenever you want, and with no consequence to another person. And of course, the other person is bleeding out, and there's no empathy for that, because there's been a cauterization of emotions. So thank you so much for tuning in. And anytime, contact the Psychological Healing Center, the website, drjudywtf.com, and our wonderful team, and the seminars and webinars coming up. And be in touch. I'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.